Hey everyone!
It's another What We Read
Yes,
episode.
it is!
So we're doing a lot of catch up, in case you couldn't tell.
That is true.
So I'm gonna kick things off by talking about two contemporary books that I read. One is one that I read quite a while back and completely forgot to mention in any video, which is a travesty because it was so much fun to read. The book in question is A Princess in Theory. This is part of the Reluctant Royal series by Alyssa Cole. So it is about grad school student Naledi Smith. So she keeps getting these emails and she considers them junk emails because they're basically telling her that she's betrothed to an African prince. But it turns out it's actually true. She is betrothed to an African prince named Thabiso, and he is the sole heir of the throne of Thesolo. And so he ends up coming to New York and sort of maneuvering it so that he gets to meet Naledi without her knowing that he's a prince. And stuff happens from there. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, here's the thing. I'm not really a big royal romance reader. Like, that's not really my thing. However, this book was just like fun. It was so escapist to go into a story where like you knew there was going to be a happily ever after, and you also had the added bonus of like this whole royal aspect to it. What I really liked is that the main character Naledi is smart and capable, and she really knows her own mind. I loved seeing her as a grad student, and I loved seeing her work hard for what she really wanted out of life and to not really back down from that. And it was also interesting to get to know Thabiso a bit. He kind of reminds me of T'Challa, like Black Panther a little bit. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but that's how it came across to me. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. It was kind of like reading a romantic comedy in a book, so that's always a good escapist thing for me, and I am definitely going to check out the rest of the books in this series. And then we have You Say It First, which is by Katie Cotugno. This is her latest book. It is about two teens, Meg and Colby, and they end up having a conversation randomly after Meg calls Colby from a voter's bank where she's trying to teach people how to register for voting. They strike up a relationship based solely on texts and phone calls. They kind of get to know each other. Because they're from such different walks of life and different situations, they end up pushing each other to, you know, sort of examine the boundaries of their life or examine their own shortcomings or problems and to see it in a different light, really. And what I like about You Say It First is that, much like Katie Cotugno's other books, her characters are like the crowning glory of it. Meg and Colby are just normal everyday teens who have all of these sort of different things they're dealing with in life, and it's interesting to see them both act well and make mistakes or make snap judgments or have emotional reactions. For me, like, that has always been the thing about Katie Cotugno's books that stand out. She's not afraid to make her characters do things that are, you know, not necessarily the right course of action, and to have two characters like that push up against each other so much so that it brokers some sort of shift in perspective or change in their personality or their future or like how they view things is really great, and I really enjoyed it for that. This sort of feels like a callback to the original like 2 novels she produced, so I'm really glad about that, and I am definitely going to recommend you check this out. I also think that she did a good job sort of weaving in the political aspect of it as well. Like, I wasn't sure about that going in, like how it would, you know, go down for me, but it was actually pretty good. So yeah, very interesting. Back to X-Men.
Right, now, so this is going to be part 2 of my sort of breakdown of the whole Dawn of X kind of series, because, you know, Dawn of X is the new normal for X-Men. I don't want to have to go through like the entire, like, I don't want to go through the entire explanation of how we got here, which will link to the original video, but suffice to say, the X-Men now have a new normal. Randomly, mysteriously, amazingly, scientifically, mutantly, they now have their own country. They have issued an order to the whole world saying, hi, we are now your new benign overlords. We have the cure to cancer and Alzheimer's and all that kind of stuff, which we will give to you on given the following conditions. If A, treat us like a real country, 2, treat us like people, and 3, eventually we're going to end up buying the whole world and taking over because that's what you like. Because we're that awesome and it's going to be great. So that's where everything is now. And everyone is now friends. Every single mutant has united. Charles Xavier issued a mental sort of like note to the whole world basically saying, hi, mutants have a home now, come home. Any mutant by birth is immediately a resident or a citizen of Krakoa, which is like the new island. Okay. Again, Krakoa is a throwback to a very, very, really cool transitional point of X-Men. And did you know, trivia, Krakoa was an island that Charles Xavier sent his first set of students, Scott, Jean, everybody else too, and then only Scott came back. and he needed new X-Men, and that's how he recruited Storm and Wolverine and Nightcrawler and all of these other guys, Colossus. So there was like the American X-Men, and there's the international X-Men from Canada, Russia, Africa, that kind of deal. All parts of Africa, because Storm is apparently a goddess pretty much everywhere and in any universe. And that island, that same island, they sort of like, you're a mutant too, it's going to be fine. And they live there now with this new sort of normal where they have these cures, they have the upper hand economically speaking. So many things have happened, and every single X title, X thing has been repurposed for this new world. Out of the 6 main titles that have come up, that are collected in Dawn of X, where Dawn of X 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 collects issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of each of these 6 new titles. I want to talk about 3 of them, right? Let's start with New Mutants. Now, New Mutants by history was sort of like one of the new generation class of mutants that Charles had done. So the X-Men started out as teens, right? So Scott, Jean, everyone. They're like Marvel's response to the Teen Titans, basically. Right? Okay. And there were crossovers. Obviously, those guys aged out into the actual main X-Men sort of thing, and they needed new students. Like, they're not students anymore. And so that same group, so Danny Moonstar, who is, and there's a New Mutants movie coming out, maybe, I don't know anymore, nobody knows. Danny Moonstar, Ilyana Rasputin, Colossus' sister, Karma, Shan McCoy, all of these, Roberto da Costa, like, they decided to, get the band back together and go to space, which to me was just like, all right, everything seems to be set on Earth, but the New Mutants are going to space. Why? Because Cannonball, one of their friends, is out there, and they thought that he needed help, but in fact, he was the one who ended up helping them. So it's this, I want to call it out because it's the weirdest of all of the titles to me personally, and I like that the old group is together. I like that they've centered it around Roberto, who is super rich and just crazy, and his voice adds that kind of sort of Deadpool-y kind of sardonic take on the whole thing, gives it that nice kind of air. I mean, he's hitting on Deathbird, for heaven's sake, and I love that so much. And yes, they are in Shi'ar space. If you haven't understood a single thing that I said, that makes total sense, because it's the New Mutants. I mean, they've been sort of in and out of the running for a long, long time, and so to have them come back and to tell a totally new kind of space buddy friendship story, akin to like Guardians of the Galaxy, that kind of deal, where it's just shenanigans one after the other. It's really for the fans. It's not the first book that I would put in front of you and go, you gotta read New Mutants.
Okay.
I'm like, maybe you want to read the old Mutants. Old New, just to catch on. So it's really a lot of fan service, which I think is what works. Now here's something that you can jump straight into because there is no precedent for it.
Okay.
Sort of. And I say sort of because it's called Fallen Angels. It centers around Psylocke. Sure. And a lot of people know Psylocke as Elizabeth Braddock. She's like this Asian-looking woman because she was trapped in an Asian assassin's body somewhere in the 80s and 90s because she used to have like purple hair, and she was British, and she was Brian Braddock's sister, and that kind of deal. And then eventually she gets trapped into an assassin's body. But guess what? She's back in her own body, and the assassin is still around, and the assassin is a mutant, and her name's Quanon, and she's Japanese, and she's, like lethal, and she's like, I hate you for taking control of my body. I knew it wasn't your fault, but I still hate you, that kind of deal. And she's the main character of this whole thing.
Okay.
Something from her past comes back that threatens the humans, and she's like, it's from my past, it's killing people, it's killing kids. I can't let that slide. So call me Psylocke, still, because the name's stuck, the power's stuck, she still has the knife. And she recruits X-23, and she recruits Baby Cable. Don't even, okay, then maybe, yeah, this is something that you, like, how do we have Baby Cable? Timey-wimey stuff, that's how we, it's like, if you just, Cable's young now, that's just all that you need to know. And it centers around Quanon, and you get to see her past. It talks about her past. We get to know this Japanese assassin a little bit more, recaps everything. So this I would recommend if you wanted a nice new gritty X-Men title, and if you like you some X-23, and if you thought Cable was cool with Josh Brolin and that Deadpool movie, this is the thing for you. So that was nice. Closed circuit. It ends, I think, on the 6th one. I think they continued it afterwards, and I think I understand why, because it didn't really take off. But it was a nice, clean story. It's got a really great redemption arc. And it's still set against the backdrop of, we don't really care about the humans anymore, but what do we do about that? Right? There's no heaven that I want to. And there's even some cameos from some old X-Men that I'm like, oh, cool. The team grew a little bit. But it gives you that whole feel of, there is no heaven worth staying in if there are others who are in trouble or in need. So in so many ways, they carry the old Xavier dream into the thing.
That's nice.
Lastly, this is also another new, you don't really need that much background. As long as you know who Shadowcat is, Kitty Pryde, who's now going by Kate Pryde. If you know who she is, for whatever reason, she's the only one who can't get onto the island through the new portals that they created. Yes, there are portals. Please read House of X, Powers of X. But that's the new thing now. Like Krakoa, as part of the technology they do, it's portals anywhere and everywhere. and for whatever reason, Kitty can't pass through them. Maybe it's because of her phasing powers, we don't know. But she can't just walk and teleport, portal through into Krakoa. At the same time, there are a bunch of mutants that are being detained in their countries because they want to go home, and their countries are like, no, you're like a powerful asset. We're not going to let our living weapons leave the country. And so now there is a need to create a means to bring them home, and that is Kitty. She is captain of the Marauder, which is a name repurposed from some old X-Men villains called the Marauders. Victor Creed, who was Sabretooth, was part of this thing. But she's basically a pirate ship, right? But here's the best, and so she has her own little ship now. Storm is on this team, Iceman is on this team. It's an amazing lineup. You've got Pyro, Bishop, and she's working with Emma Frost. Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost working together. This to me is just like, and Emma's one of the most problematic to the X-Men. Not to me, I love her, but to the X-Men, and she and Kitty especially have a very long history. So to have them both working together on this thing as the White Queen, and eventually Kitty's own place in the Hellfire Club that has been recreated. There is still a White Queen, there is still a Black King, and then Kitty finds her place in that monarchy, right? And what they do for Krakoa is, that's the thing. So if you like you some Hellfire Club shenanigans, if you like you some Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde sort of like banter, if you like just the idea of Kitty Pryde having her own ship, this is totally the one for you. I love this. And Storm, can I just say, I'll end it with this. Storm has the best lines in these books that are pretty much almost ever, really. Like, if you want to see Storm as a magnificent badass again, the Marauders just keeps her brand shiny and bright and goddess-like. And if just for Storm, read the Marauders. Like, that she's a secondary character takes none of the shine away. Like, the tiny bit of Storm that you get, it's just like, that was good for like 3 books. I'm good. Like, that's how awesome that is. She doesn't need more time. That's all that you need. So
It's pretty cool.
yes, it is.
Alright, so you guys are gonna have to wait for part 3 of that X-Men thing in the next What We Read video. Meanwhile, I have only one more book to talk about, but the reason I saved it for last is because, number one, this was not a book I thought I would ever finish reading in 2020, or even intend to read in 2020. I didn't even intend to read it in 2020.
But it is on the bucket
number
list.
2, it was on my bookish bucket list for the longest time. The book in question is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This particular translation is by Kristen, I don't know how you say her last name, Donahue, I want to say. And this is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. This is a hefty book, okay? It's like, the back, granted, is like a lot of footnotes and like, you know, sources and stuff like that, but it's still 1,304 pages, and that's a lot. I started reading this book in January, and I did not finish it until the end of April. Granted, there was like a month-long time where I did not read anything of it, so technically I read it in a little less time than that, but it is a chunky boy.
Oh yeah, you bet.
Very. I'm not even gonna hold it up because my arm is already tired just holding it for now.
Yeah, starring Jean Chunky Boy Valjean.
The thing about Les Miserables is the reason I wanted to read it is because I've always found the musical interesting. The movie was fun, but the musical is what we're gonna focus on. So
musical.
I am familiar with the basics of the story as presented in the musical and even in the movies. I think there's a BBC miniseries, haven't watched that.
Yeah.
But I know the basics of the story and I know the characters. And I have to say that helped a lot going into this one. Right now I'm going to like preface this by saying I literally read this for entertainment. I did not read it from an academic perspective, and I don't have any like opinion in that vein. The beginning was a bit of a struggle because it starts off with a character that is basically not a main character in
Do we ever see that
any
character
iteration.
again?
No.
Here's some prologue prose.
He's just in like book 1 basically of this. There's like 7 or 8 books in this book already. The thing is, I wasn't familiar with how the flow of the story was gonna go. As I successively continued reading Les Miserables, I realized that it always begins every section with a history lesson of sorts or a morality lesson of sorts. And once I started figuring that out, my brain started adjusting to the fact that that's how the narrative flows. It would start with some sort of history lesson that didn't seem related to anything, but then would be related to the actual plot later on. I now know way more about Parisian history, Parisian slang in general, religion, morality, the jailhouse system, and the sewers of the time that is in Les Miserables than I ever wanted to know. I will say that even though I do like history, those parts are a little hard for me to get through sometimes because they were very, very wordy. But the rest of the book, the actual story with Jean Valjean and all the characters, it was just as interesting as it is in the musical or the film. if not more so, because you kind of get an even deeper look into their mind. So you get to know them a little better. Like for me, it's funny because I always appreciated Jean Valjean in all of those things, but in the book itself, you actually see his struggle a lot more clearly, and it's always a question of morality with him and like his conscience, and he's always struggling and wrestling with that side of him that wants to go against his conscience, and it's interesting. It definitely gives rise to a lot of questions about, you know, morality, what's good and what's wrong, ethics, and all of that stuff, which is fun. I will say though that it's funny because like reading this, I'm like, okay, I appreciated Fantine, I could sort of understand Jean Valjean better, but aside from that, I mean, it was just interesting to see all of these characters in the way that Victor Hugo portrayed them, as translated by this translator, obviously. But it was just interesting because it felt like a fuller look. Like a lot of it is glossy when you watch a film or a musical version of it.
Well, yeah.
In the book, it's kind of, it feels more raw. Like it feels raw, it feels a little more honest in the portrayals. Like these are not necessarily likable characters. Do they do good things? Yes. Are they also occasionally drama kings? Yes. And yes, I'm talking about Marius, because Marius Pontmercy, man. After reading this book,
Pontmercy.
I have a lot of thoughts about it. But to be fair, a lot of the guys in this book are drama kings. And then you have like the...
I'm so done with like my Les Miserables face.
So Les Miserables.
It's great. It's great. I
can definitely see why it's one of those works where it feels pivotal, because it really captures the essence of that time period. It also does this really intense character study, because you actually see Jean Valjean from when he's young all the way to when he's older, and then you also see it with some of the other characters as well, because that is a child at the beginning, and by the end she's like a grown, like she's a teen, like an older teen. So I can see why it seems to be sort of like one of those things that everyone considers a classic or foundational, because I don't think I've ever read a classic quite like it in a sense. So I appreciated the experience just for the fact that it sort of gave me a new reading classics experience. And like I said, I particularly enjoyed the character studies, and I really like this translation too, because the way that she would phrase certain things like really stood out to me. Like I dog ear my book sometimes, so I'm just gonna like randomly pick a dog ear section. Love so great that it is absolute involves some sort of divine blindness to propriety. But what dangers you run, O noble souls! Often you give your heart, we take your body. You are left with your heart, and there in the shadows you gaze on it, quaking. There is no halfway with love. It means either ruin or salvation.
Wow.
This is the dilemma of all human existence, and no fate poses this dilemma, ruin or salvation, more inexorably than love. Love means life unless it means death, cradle, and also coffin. The same emotion says yes and no in the human heart. Of all the things God has made, the human heart is the one that sheds the most light, and alas, the most darkness. Like, stuff like that.
Alright.
Like,
Alright,
it's
Victor
interesting to me
Hugo.
because, like, sometimes I would read things like that and I'd have to stop and, like, really think about what he was trying to say. There's definitely a heavy historical bent and a heavy bent towards ethics and morality, but there's also a heavy religious bent in this novel.
Of course, yeah.
Which is unsurprising, because that's part of the thing. So suffice it to say, what I really want to say about Les Miserables is I can't believe I finally read it. I consider it like the highlight of my year. If I did not read any more books the rest of this year, that would probably be like the greatest achievement.
But she will.
But I will. Overall, I enjoyed it. It took me some time to get through, but I actually do not mind that it did, because it helped me to get really into the story. I don't know that I would recommend it, because it would really depend on how willing you are to read that many pages, although there are abridged versions that are much shorter. But I do recommend this translation, and if you are into Les Miserables, if you like the story and you want to know more about these characters and the actual source text, then definitely check it out. Alright, that's enough talking about Les Miserables now. We are at the end of this What We Read.
Yes,
we hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any feelings on any of the books, or if you want to talk about Les Miserables, feel free to leave a comment. We hope you guys have been enjoying our videos. Hope you're well. We'd love it if you subscribe to the channel, and you can check out all of our links below. And we will see you guys next week with a new video.
Bye!